There are people who spend their entire lives hiding behind masks, pretending to be someone they are not because the idea of revealing their true selves feels like standing naked under a spotlight. These people develop a silent fear that grows slowly inside them, rooted in past experiences where authenticity was punished, mocked, or ignored. As children, they learned that being themselves brought consequences, criticism from parents, rejection from peers, or expectations they could never meet. Over time, they built a psychological shield made of behaviors, habits, and identities that do not belong to them, but feel safer than facing the vulnerability of being real. This fear alters the way they talk, dress, interact, and even think. They rehearse conversations in their minds and study people's reactions to ensure they fit perfectly in every environment. Yet, despite all their effort, deep inside they carry an exhausting emptiness, as if they are living someone else's life while their real personality sleeps trapped behind layers of insecurity. This fear becomes a prison, and the longer they stay inside, the harder it becomes to remember who they truly were before the world taught them to hide. People who fear being themselves are extremely sensitive to judgment. They interpret even neutral expressions as signs of rejection and often apologize excessively for simply existing. This hypersensitivity creates a distorted internal world where every action feels like a potential threat. A simple comment from someone can feel like an attack, and a small disagreement can feel like absolute failure. Their minds are constantly scanning for danger, replaying conversations, overanalyzing tone, or imagining worst-case scenarios. Because they fear disapproval, they adapt to whatever others expect from them. They mimic personalities, mirror behaviors, and agree with opinions they don't actually believe in. They fear that expressing their real thoughts will cause conflict or distance. But the tragedy is that these habits reduce their sense of identity until they no longer know what they actually like, value, or desire. They become spectators of their own life instead of participants. This psychological tension drains their energy, leaving them mentally fatigued, emotionally overwhelmed, and terrified that one day people might discover the truth, that they have no idea who they really are anymore. One of the most painful experiences for these individuals is the feeling of living undercover. They present a version of themselves that is socially acceptable, charming, competent, or harmless, depending on the environment. But inside, they feel like imposters. They fear being exposed not because they are doing something wrong, but because they believe their true self is unworthy or inferior. This belief usually comes from early experiences where their emotions were dismissed, their talents undervalued, or their failures amplified. The mind internalizes these moments as evidence that authenticity equals weakness, so the safest strategy becomes hiding. They build a false self that functions like armor, rigid, protective, but extremely heavy. Over time, the false self becomes so habitual that they start to believe it is the real one. However, the subconscious never forgets what is being hidden. It produces anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and chronic self-doubt. It whispers questions late at night. Why can't you just be yourself? But the answer is complicated. They fear that showing their true identity will cause abandonment, embarrassment, or emotional pain. As a result, they become experts at disappearing inside their own life. Relationships are extremely challenging for people who fear authenticity. They tend to overinvest in pleasing others while underinvesting in themselves. This dynamic creates friendships and relationships that are unbalanced, where the person constantly gives while receiving very little in return. They fear saying no, fear setting boundaries, and fear expressing discomfort, even when someone treats them unfairly. Because they rarely reveal their true feelings, others never get to know who they actually are. This leads to a painful cycle. People become attached to the mask, not the real person. And when someone praises them or shows affection, it doesn't feel genuine, because deep down they know the affection is directed at a character, not their real self. This creates a suffocating loneliness even when surrounded by people. They feel unseen, not because others are blind, but because they never allow themselves to be visible. Over time, this emotional starvation creates resentment, exhaustion, and the heartbreaking belief that they are unlovable unless they pretend. The fear of being oneself often extends into career and ambitions. Many people choose jobs not because they truly want them, but because they believe those paths will impress others or avoid criticism. They suppress their creativity, passions, or dreams, telling themselves those desires are unrealistic or childish. However, what they are truly afraid of is failure, because failure in something they genuinely care about feels more painful than failing at something they don't. They convince themselves to follow a path that is safe, predictable, and accepted by society. But the longer they suppress their real desires, the heavier the regret becomes. They watch others live boldly and wonder why they can't do the same. They fear taking risks, speaking up, or pursuing a purpose, because doing so would require revealing their true interests, the very thing they have been hiding for years. This internal conflict creates a quiet, chronic frustration that grows stronger as the years pass. One of the deepest roots of this fear is embarrassment. These individuals grew up in environments where mistakes were not tolerated, where expressing emotions was met with mockery, or where vulnerability was punished instead of supported. As a result, they developed a hyper-awareness of how others perceive them. Even small actions like laughing too loudly, showing enthusiasm, or asking a question feel dangerous because they fear becoming the target of ridicule. They hide traits that make them unique and try to conform to a safe version of themselves. But this conformity slowly erases their spark. They silence their humor, intelligence, curiosity, and creativity. Over time, they lose touch with the spontaneous parts of themselves, becoming controlled, rigid, or overly cautious. The saddest part is that this self-erasure happens gradually, without them realizing it, until one day they look in the mirror and see a person shaped by fear instead of authenticity. Despite their fear, these individuals often have extraordinary inner worlds. They think deeply, observe carefully, and feel emotions intensely. Their sensitivity gives them a unique understanding of others, which ironically makes them excellent listeners, compassionate friends, and thoughtful partners. But because they fear disappointing people, they rarely express their true perspectives. They underestimate how much wisdom they actually possess and assume others wouldn't value their thoughts. This internal richness becomes hidden treasure, beautiful, but locked away. And the world never benefits from the authenticity they suppress. What they don't realize is that many of the qualities they hide are the very things others would admire most. The problem is not that they lack value. It is that they have been conditioned to doubt every part of themselves that stands out. Ironically, the turning point for these individuals often comes when the pain of hiding becomes greater than the fear of being seen. Eventually, the emotional exhaustion accumulates to the point where they feel trapped inside a life that doesn't belong to them. They may experience burnout, depression, or crisis of identity moments where they question everything. Instead of breaking them, these experiences often become a doorway to self-discovery. They begin to realize that authenticity is not about being perfect, but about being honest. They learn that vulnerability is not weakness, but a form of courage. Slowly, they begin taking small risks, sharing an opinion, expressing a boundary, or showing a real emotion. With each step, they discover that the world does not collapse. In fact, people respond with understanding, respect, and sometimes admiration. This becomes the first proof that being themselves is not dangerous, but freeing. Healing the fear of authenticity requires unlearning years of psychological conditioning. It begins with questioning the beliefs they absorbed in childhood, beliefs like, I'm not good enough. People will leave if they know the real me, or my feelings don't matter. These beliefs were formed during moments of emotional vulnerability, often before they had the cognitive ability to understand the world. As adults, they can finally challenge these beliefs by observing how the world responds when they reveal small pieces of their real identity. Therapy, journaling, and self-reflection help them reconnect with lost parts of themselves. Over time, they rediscover hobbies, passions, and values that were buried under years of pretending. This process is not easy. It requires patience, courage, and self-compassion. But it is also deeply rewarding because it leads them back to the person they were always meant to be. In the end, the journey toward authenticity is a return to the self. It is the realization that the world will always have opinions, judgments, and expectations, but none of them matter more than living a life that feels honest. People who fear being themselves often overlook a powerful truth. Authenticity attracts the right people and repels the wrong ones. When they finally remove the mask, they not only free themselves from psychological imprisonment, but also create space for genuine relationships, meaningful opportunities, and inner peace. The process may feel terrifying, especially after years of hiding, but the reward is profound. To be authentic is to reclaim your own life. And once they taste that freedom, they never want to go back to pretending. Because for the first time, they understand that being themselves was never the problem, the fear was.